What's going on? I'll tell you what's going on. Lots changing. That's what's going on. I hope everyone's doing good right now. Had a good Thanksgiving. We are in December. That means you're headed towards winter break. If you're anything like me, probably looking forward to it a lot. But until then, we have to get through a couple more of these podcasts. And today is an interesting one. I've been getting asked about this ever since COVID became a thing. And, UC started making announcements. Schools since last year started going test optional. What is going on? So anyway, before I get into it, if you want to support the channel and get some more good stuff and content, advice on all things college admissions and maybe even life someday, definitely would appreciate a like button, maybe subscribe, maybe a couple shares with some friends. But if you don't, it's fine. Today, it's just going to be me, and we're going to be talking about what's going on right now. So what is going on now with testing? I'll just tell it up front. I mean, first and foremost, if the answer was one word, like a yes or a no, then this podcast would be over in about 3 seconds. But it is not. Because the answer, unfortunately, is, does testing still matter? And the answer is yes and no, unfortunately. It depends. Hate to say it, guys, but it really just depends. Depends on what? One, are you planning on applying, or are you currently applying to a college that is test optional? Because if the answer is yes, I'm applying to a college that is test optional, like a ton of private schools, like non-UC schools, right? Like public universities out there that are not located in the or California. So if the colleges that you're aiming for are test optional, yes, it still does matter, because those colleges will very much like to see an additional data point that verifies your academic aptitude. So I'm sorry. If you're hoping that I would say, no, it does not matter anymore, chances are nowadays, guys, you will be applying to a lot more than just the UCs and a lot more than just the CSUs. You'll likely be applying to the UIUCs of the world, UMich, BU, NYU, USC, Harvard, Stanford. I mean, who knows what else is out there. Point is, a lot of those schools are still pretty much test optional. And being test optional doesn't mean that the test doesn't matter. No, being test optional is unfortunately being politically correct and saying, if you didn't have the chance to take the standardized test this year because of COVID, we will let you go and you don't have to submit the test score. But put yourself in their shoes. If you've been doing admissions for a while, year after year after year, and you get to verify the GPA with the test score, of course, you're still going to want to take it. It's called equilibrium. It's called tradition. It's called what they're used to doing. So, no, it does not matter anymore. Testing does not matter anymore if you are only applying to the UCs and CSUs this year. Yes, I said it. It's currently December 4th, 2020. And if you are applying to UCs or CSUs this year, meaning you are currently a senior, it does not matter. Now, I'm not one to generally speculate, but for anybody who knows me, I've worked in the stock market on Wall Street, and it's not hard to predict that it will likely not matter for the UCs and CSUs next year either. Because what happened to start all this, guys? What is the confusion? Well, the confusion is this. In September of this year, so just about, 3 months ago, all right, there was a court order that filed a preliminary injunction that bars the UCs, just the UCs, not the CSUs, just UCs from using the SAT or the ACT on college admissions this year, for now, right, until there's a final decision that's reached. So that means what? UCs are not test optional. They cannot use the test. There's a big difference. Okay, being test optional is, okay, you can submit it or you don't have to, right? We'll take a look at it if you have one. If you don't have it, don't worry. This is like, no, you cannot even use it, because the ruling was stemmed from the fact that the lawsuit that was brought up, by the way, which was heard in the Alameda County Superior Court, which is interesting, which is right here in our backyard, was filed from the perspective of disabled students. So students with disabilities, right, simply did not have even close to equal access to standardized testing, during COVID, which, by the way, it was already hard enough for the students with disabilities to get access to fair testing practices already. But just based on that argument of inequity, the judge agreed and said, okay, due to this inequity or inequality, if you will, right, or unfairness, UCs, you cannot use the SAT or ACT. Now, here's the caveat. This does not apply to the CSUs, and big exclamation point, this does not apply apparently until someone tells me otherwise. Maybe you have to do some legal court order digging stuff, but it does not apply to subject tests either. So yes, I just said it, subject tests are still fair game, meaning UCs this year included, and who knows what's gonna happen next, but they still will look at your subject tests. They still will look at your AP exam scores, right, from prior years. So that's what's going on. It's this court order, preliminary injunction that bars the users from using it. So now what, right? Now what is CSUs in order, in my opinion, well, let me give you the objective fact. The CSUs then immediately followed and said, okay, we're not going to look at the SAT or ACT this year anymore. Right. Again, that's 2020. This admission cycle for fall 2021 start. Okay. And my opinion is that the CSUs did this because they were like, I don't want a lawsuit. So I'm just going to follow whatever the court says for the UCs, right? Which, by the way, is very interesting because the CSUs historically have relied on the test score for something called an eligibility index. In case you're wondering what that is, that just means that if your GPA was really, really low, they use this eligibility index to use the SAT or ACT test score to actually balance it out to make sure that you're still minimally eligible to qualify for the CSU. Whereas the UC system, there's no such thing as a minimum eligibility index, right, that they use, or certainly not published publicly. So why is that so significant for the CSUs to announce that they're not going to take the test score anymore? It's because, guys, naturally, right, they don't look at your ECs. They don't have college application essays like the UCs do. So 50% of their overall assessment of you as a candidate is now gone. So naturally, it's a good segue, right? Naturally, it's a good segue, which is, okay, well, what are the UCs likely going to do going forward? They have three options. The UCs have three options, right? Simple, in my opinion. Number one, let it be and just wait it out. Wait it out. Once COVID is over, okay, they'll just go back to business as usual. That is very possible. In fact, probably the most probable, right? But for now, I think for the year of 2020 and fall admission cycle 2021, meaning if you're a junior right now, next year likely, unless somehow the numbers of COVID infections just drops to near zero, chances are this call by the judge is going to hold, right? Because if you still have COVID, I don't believe that College Board is going to be able to figure it out to somehow increase some equity for students with disabilities. I just don't see it happening. That's one option, right? You see, just wait it out, and then sometime 2022. So if you're a sophomore, or if you're a parent of a sophomore or freshman, right? I'm pretty sure the UCs will have a test for you then, okay? Now, it's important to note, before this even happened, before the court injunction happened, the UCs were already under tremendous pressure to get rid of the test because of inequity. In fact, it's well known for anybody who knows about college admissions. I've been doing this for a very long time. Basically, your test scores correlate with your zip codes, AKA your test scores correlate with affluent neighborhoods. So how affluent is your neighborhood? Will tell you how high your test will likely be. It's an unfortunate truth, unpleasant truth, but it is the truth, because if you have more intellectual resource and intellectual capital surrounded, by you the whole time, naturally you're probably going to have, 400 more words in your vocabulary than someone who grew up in a very poor and underserved area. And so for these reasons, the UCs were under tremendous pressure to get rid of this anyway. And so this leads me to option number two, right? So if they don't want to wait this thing out and if they want to relinquish their dependency on standardized testing, agencies like the SAT and ACT, they can make their own. And guess what? They made that announcement earlier this year. They were like, yeah, we're going to actually go test optional. And by the way, after 2 years, we're going to actually replace it with our own version, which is really interesting. So stay tuned. If that eventually materializes, I'm sure we'll have another podcast just to talk about that. By the way, I do have a hunch as to what that new form will be. I guess you'd have to wait until we see more stuff, but I do have a hunch of what that test will likely look like. And by the way, chances are it'll be actually harder than the SAT or ACT. Sorry, guys. Lastly, the last option that UC can or has rather is to get rid of testing altogether. Not likely, but possible. They may get rid of it altogether. And the primary argument is just one of equity, right? Is let's just get rid of this if all it's doing is perpetuating socioeconomic class inequity, right? Okay, so what does this mean tangibly to you? Or if you're a parent, how does this affect your student? What's going on, right? Put simply, if your student is still on the trajectory of applying to these colleges that are test optional outside the UC system, right? They should still be preparing for the exam. Which one? Right now, I'm a bigger fan of the ACT because they just don't seem to be canceling their tests as often as the College Board SAT is, okay? Over the past several months, my students have had much better luck taking the ACT over the SAT. The SAT College Board seems to just keep shoveling their test dates down and down and down until they have one that's actually available. But again, look at the COVID numbers right now. If that's of any indication, I don't think College Board will, I don't know, but based on what I know about numbers of infection rates and stuff, I don't think College Board is going to show up any better than they did for the past couple of months. So if I were you, and you are planning, or you have a student who's planning to apply to a university that's test optional, okay, then I would begin planning for that. So whether you're an underclassman or you're a junior, right, begin thinking about that. Okay, it's maybe I should start training for the ACT sometime in 2021, 2022, okay, depending on the schedule, obviously. But what else does it mean? Well, if testing is becoming de-emphasized, right? Not only from these schools that suddenly went test optional, but also now the UCs which can't even use it as part of their application review process, right? Then everything else becomes more important. Notably, guys, number one, your GPA. And I really want to focus, guys, on the talk of unweighted GPA, okay? You need to do whatever you can to maximize your unweighted GPA. And by the way, seniors, if I have any seniors here listening to me today, make sure you do the very best you can this first semester. You know why? It's because these colleges that you just applied to are going to come back and ask for a first semester checkup. And that happens sometime around January, February. They're going to ask you to update your grades from first semester. And you don't want to be caught, right? You just don't want to be caught with senioritis. Why is that, by the way, in case you guys are curious? Because a lot of high schools in the nation, when the pandemic hit, this second semester of 11th grade, a lot of those high schools issued pass, no pass. And so as a result, a ton of students, and I wouldn't be surprised if you're one of them, right? They don't have a second semester from 11th grade to show for. Now, before the pandemic, colleges were already increasingly asking for senior year first semester grades at around the same time, January, February. We've seen that over the past countless years at this point, right? Now it becomes more important, logically, because again, when do college application decisions come out? Generally speaking, unless you're an early action candidate or ASU candidate, which lets you know in about 4 weeks or less, generally speaking, you learn about your result in April or May time, right? Waitlisted students can find themselves waiting a little bit longer until like even June, hopefully not longer than that. The point is, why I'm trying to say this is because, well, think about it. If your decision is not given to you or made by April, they're probably still weighing you out, right? So January, February is still early in the process. They get a look at your first semester grades, and that can really make the difference, guys. So you really don't want to drop that, okay? And for all other underclassmen, so if you're 9th, 10th, 11th, or what have you, right? You really need to focus on really boosting the unweighted GPA. Okay, now I say unweighted because too many people obsess about taking APs and weighted coursework because they want to show that they can handle the rigor. Well, tell you what, guys, take as many AP and weighted courses as you can and still get A's. How about that? Because it's not an or statement. We don't want to see you getting a bunch of good grades, or having taken, we don't want to see you basically only either getting a bunch of good grades or taking weighted courses. No, we want to see you taking weighted courses and getting good grades. So whatever number of weighted courses it is, that allows you to still get A's, that's the number of weighted courses you want. There is not a fixed number. Don't think about that, okay? Secondly, and naturally, right, your activities and your ECs, I hate saying ECs, but your activities and the things you've done outside of class become more important, right? Naturally, if you wipe one factor away from the admissions review process, the other factors then all become that bit much more important. So what are you doing outside of class? And don't use COVID as an excuse to not do anything. I have tons of students here. We have tons of students here who are so active right now, it's insane. Some of them actually maybe more active than they were before the pandemic, right? Doing things outside of class. There's a lot you can do. So if you guys need advice on maybe what to do, how to improve, let's say, your leadership experiences or bolster your volunteer service opportunities, hit us up, right? We're here to help. We're here to give you guys concrete ideas deliverable over timelines. Okay. So thirdly, college applications then suddenly become a little bit more important, specifically your essays, right? I've noticed that some parents and other community members have already started catching on to this, which is really funny because when I first started working as a college counselor in the Bay Area about 10 years ago, whatever it was, people were still asking me, do essays even matter? Now it's like, they get rid of the SAT, guys, all the other factors become a thing. There's three, right? Numbers, GPA, I'll get to the subject tests and AP exams in a bit. So numbers, your GPA, your activities, and your essays, right? Those all eventually increase in their value, right, of your candidacy, not just your quantitative attributes, but your qualitative attributes. And in case you guys are wondering why the essays are so important or why I should do certain activities, right? It's because the activities is what you did. The essays explain why they mattered and why they're important. So really quick, I guess, what about other universities? I've been talking a lot about UCs, CSUs. What about other schools, right? Based on what I'm seeing, the schools tend to remain test optional. And the court order or the preliminary injunction that bars the UCs from using the SAT certainly will not, at least not that I can think of, certainly will not apply to private universities, right? Because the private schools are not, they're not really funded necessarily, although I'm sure indirectly they are. They're not primarily funded like public universities are. In fact, private universities are kind of get to set their own rules, right? So chances are, if you're interested or thinking about private schools, right? What is a private school like Santa Clara or Stanford, right? Those are both examples. You should probably still consider thinking about taking a test. And this brings me to the final point, which is, subject tests. It's possible that the court order or the court will eventually rule that they actually also need to be included in the injunction. But as of right now, it's fair game. So I want to share, proof of this because, again, I haven't been able to find proof that says, okay, no, the subject tests are also barred, right, from being used in admissions. I think they're being used, and I have direct proof of this from a UC. And not just any UC, but, there's one that I think most of us generally apply for, and that's UC Davis. And that's right here. And you can tell that this has been updated post-injunction, right? Because you can see that, okay, right here, right? Currently, UC Davis will not consider SAT or ACT test scores, right? That was following the decision. Note that applies for making admissions decisions and awarding scholarships, okay? And the second part here, though, says we don't require SAT subject tests, but they can be used to satisfy the AG requirements. That's not what I'm looking at if you actually scroll down a little bit, and we're going to drop this link here for you guys so you guys can look at this yourself. Right there, it says SAT subject tests are not required. UC Davis will consider SAT only if they benefit the student or the applicant. So this indicates to me that it is still fair game. And if UC Davis is still taking subject tests, that should tell you two things. One, the other UCs are also taking subject tests into account if you have them. And by the way, yes, this does include you seniors. And if you're a parent of a senior who's just applying right now, yeah, I think it actually still applies to you. And the second thing it should indicate to you is that the UCs in most of the universities, even if they're barred from using this test, right, they would like to still have some other scores, because the GPA alone is not enough to tell them your overall academic achievement and aptitude, right? So what's the verdict? Do these standardized tests still matter? I guess in general, yeah, the answer is yes. But for a certain slit of the population that is only applying to the UCs this year, it does not. And that's if you're only applying to the UCs, right? But I think as we look forward, it's hard to really shake the thing that's the monster, the monolith, if you will, of college admissions in the United States. Traditions are strong. They would like to see a GPA. They would like to see standardized test scores on the side of that. And even though a college might call themselves test optional, if you have test scores, it certainly does help your case, especially if those, seem to prove or compensate rather for, your academic achievement as reflected on your transcript. So in a nutshell, when should you be worried about taking tests? Well, I'll probably make another video on that some other time. But put it simply, guys, you should only be taking exams once you reach the desired scores on your practice tests consistently. And I'll leave you with that. And that might be a good segue for another podcast video in the future. But too many students, I've learned, are kind of working on a fixed schedule cadence every year. Like they'll say, okay, I heard I have to take the summer camp training thing after my 10th grade, and then I have to take the test and get it done by the end of 11th grade. And like the truth is, guys, no, that is such a one size fits all, to be honest, it's also a schedule that's being very much, sold to you, right? The right way is, okay, what is my test score right now? Where do I want it to be realistically, right? Like, let's say, okay, I'm a 3.8 student. It's probably realistic if you do proportionate calculations, you aim for maybe a 1450 or 1400 at least, right? Okay, so you take PTs, maybe you take practice, or maybe you get practice or training from an agency. You take PTs, and PT stands for practice tests. And if your PTs are showing you what, 1350, right? A range of 1350 to 1380, that's the highest you've gotten. But your goal is 1450, right? Why would you go into an actual official test day to take the test, right? It just doesn't make any sense. You don't have the confidence to get the score you want, and you don't have the data, right, to back it up that you can get the score you want. So the truth is, when should you take a test? It's a simple universal answer. When your PTs show the test score that you want or should be getting. So maybe again another topic for another test day or another date. But in the meantime, guys, hope this provides good info. Our whole mission here is to zap your stress away, and good info and accurate info, timely info generally helps with that. So in a nutshell, yeah, if you're applying to more than the UCs, you should probably be considering the whole testing component. But if not, if the UCs is it, and that's really it, then I guess you just don't have anything to worry about this year and likely next year, because I don't think COVID's going away anytime soon. So thanks for joining, guys. And if you like this video, again, just give us a thumbs up, click the subscribe button. We'll be back with more really good content. In fact, I think next time we'll be talking about how to ace your finals a lot easier than probably the way you're doing it right now. So see you guys.